Hi, everybody. Barry McGuire here for Barry McGuire's Creative Real Estate Education Group. It's the Monday main event. We meet up every Monday and talk about real estate, generally on the creative side of things. We've covered that topic, and we keep finding more to talk about. We have pros on that help us out with the development side of things, with how insurance works, accounting, financing. Any aspect of creative real estate that needs discussing, that's who we like to get on. We like to get experts on who understand that stuff and who live in that world and have it as part of their professional or business practice, because we do want to have experts. So that's what we do every Monday. We also Donna and I produce what we call focus workshops. Those are full day or sometimes 2 full days events where we discuss agreements for sale, rent to own, joint ventures, flip and fix and flip, wholesaling options. And we are very happy to be back doing those because it was pretty miserable during COVID, not being able to meet up live. Zoom was great to have as a kind of something that we could do during COVID, but I'm really glad we can get back and do things live, because I think it's, I just like that better. I do like it better. I think it's a better event if you do it live. And on March 18th of this year, we have a full day wholesaling workshop, wholesaling/assignments workshop. That's going to be in Calgary, Alberta. We've got the hotels booked. We're working on the menus and the documents and the program. So that's going to be great. This will be our biggest and I guess most complete treatment of the wholesaling strategy that we will ever have done. There's been some amazing developments in wholesaling. I've got a story that I'm just, as my dear departed dad used to say, I'm busting a gut to tell you about this, but I'm going to save it for March 18th. It revolves around someone who did a great wholesaling deal and made a peapot full of money. Something else my dad used to say. He used to say something a little bit different than a peapot. So that's March 18th in Calgary, wholesaling. And then we have an agreement for sale, an AFS workshop, coming up in Toronto on April 1st. Interesting that we're doing that in Toronto because, as most of you know, AFS, or agreements for sale, is seller financing. And when you can pound a sign in your lawn and have 10 over list offers, you don't really need seller financing. But the worm has turned in Ontario and in BC, and so the market is down, and so the AFS strategy is coming to the fore. I've actually had a couple of lawyers reach out to me to say that they're hearing a lot about AFS in Ontario, and can I help them with what the heck is an AFS? So I'm really glad about that, because we need lawyers who understand the strategy in order to really make it work. So March 18th in Calgary wholesaling, April 1st in Ontario AFS. So that's what's coming up. Now today we are going to talk about, how should we describe this? I get lots of calls from people who have signed up for courses with U.S. real estate gurus, and they come back and they've paid a ton of money, $25,000, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000. They come back and try and apply those strategies, and sometimes they don't work very well in Canada. Sometimes they don't work at all. Sometimes they're hard to translate, and there's been a lot of inquiry around, what are those U.S. strategies and how do they apply in Canada? How can we take that U.S. information and make it apply, or does it apply? So today we are going to open up that discussion of U.S. strategies that you've heard about. And I'm expecting that all you folks who are attending, who have thoughts about U.S. strategies, will pop into the conversation and ask about a particular strategy or make comments on a U.S. strategy. And then we will try and answer. So today we're going to have, as I've referred to him before, the redoubtable Wayne Hillier, who's running the show in the background. Wayne is going to come on and assist with this discussion. We may also have Andrea Warkentin and Neil Taniguchi may also be appearing, and they will also be great to help out with the discussion of U.S. strategy. So that's what we're going to be doing today.
Sounds like a lot of fun.
Sound like a lot of fun. Well, and there's George telling us what's going on in Yarmouth.
Oh yeah. George says, good evening, everyone from Yarmouth, Nova Scotia. It was negative 20 degrees Celsius or something on Friday and Saturday and a 5 degrees Celsius today.
Isn't that the way? Wow.
So I took a couple notes while you're talking there, Barry. So I've got the worm has turned.
The worm has turned.
What was the other one? Busting a gut. Is that what you said?
Busting a gut.
And something about a pea pot.
Yeah, something about a pea pot. That's
okay.
right.
Okay. In other words, of course.
In other words, yes.
That was good stuff. I'm like, okay.
It's funny. I
use these ones.
Yeah. I say those things and I go, Donna's not on today. Donna's in Mexico, everybody. She's down in Mexico. And so she's not here to keep a rope around me. She said, you're sounding like your father more and more. I say, come on, not sounding like my dad. Well, all those things that Wayne just made notes on, those are all things I heard from my dad, including keep a rope around. That's another one. Oh my God. I'm turning into my father. However, let's see who's checking in here. Port City Trading.
Yeah. Port City Trading is checking in here on YouTube for sure. Got a bunch of great people I saw come in. Arik is here, Brandy's here, Matthew's here, Ken's here. Thank you guys all for joining.
Yeah, I'm glad.
It's unfortunate. Yeah. I've got way too many stories that I've heard about people who have taken these U.S. education or U.S. courses, and they think, just because they heard it on YouTube or they heard it on some podcast, whichever, about someone making millions, off of this cool strategy. And then they go and they take these courses. I don't know why these U.S. educators are taking their money. They should say, are you from Canada? They should ask, because they're spending tens of thousands of dollars on these courses and coaching and stuff. And then they're finding out it doesn't apply.
Yeah. It's I hate getting those calls, and I get quite a few of them from people who say, Barry, well, we're ready to invest in Canada. We took a course with insert name of U.S. guru.
Yep.
And we want to use this strategy and that strategy, some other strategy, and we hope you know all about those. And I'm always kind of biting my tongue and, okay, what do I say to people about it? And they pay a lot of money. For these courses. So folks, you just have to be aware of that. Anybody who's watching, who's thinking about taking a U.S. course, we're not trying to tar all of these folks, the U.S. educators, gurus with the same brush. I'm sure there must be some there that are producing value for money who might recognize that you're Canadian. But, this reminds me of doing those courses with Ron LeGrand, famous U.S. guru. And when the Rain Group was bringing Ron in, they had me up on the stage. And as Ron would say, all right, these courses, these concepts, these documents, these work in all 50 states, all 10 Canadian provinces. Y'all have some territories, don't you?
Yep.
Works everywhere without amendment. I go, okay, Ron, that's not quite true. He'd glare at me and threaten me, and it was like we were doing wrestling. It's all scripted. But some of the stuff from the U.S. is similar. They use different words to describe some of the things we do in Canada. Some stuff we don't do at all. So, folks, yes, George, I have free reign tonight. I won't get the look from Donna. She won't be chirping me from the other side of the table like she likes to do. She's probably listening. Donna, are you listening?
Even though she's on vacation, you know she's watching you. She is so obsessed with you. It's ridiculous.
I'm pretty sure she's right.
Look, you can see her behind your left shoulder.
I'd love the digital photo frame. It's great. So Don Gallardi says, why would you take a course in the U.S. if not investing in the U.S.? Well, Don, that's
great question.
That's a great question and a great observation. I think people do that because it isn't clear to them when they're being sold the course that what they learn in the U.S. may not assist them in Canada. You know, Canadians mostly feel that they're getting some education that they want to apply in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
That's why they do it. And, you know, if it doesn't apply, why take somebody's money, as you said? That's really not playing for win-win the way we certainly believe you should run your life and your investing plans. Always play for win-win.
Mm-hmm.
30,000 drain.
I mean, I've been a part of this for just over a decade now. And from what I see on social media, there is not nearly as much Canadian content as there is US content. And I think that's just because the US is so much bigger.
Yeah.
But for those that are, you know, that watch a Grant Cardone Instagram video, or, you know, they see someone, that they hear about someone doing really well in real estate, when you type in real estate investing into Google, you're 90% of the time you're going to get US searches. You're going to get the US results. And it's kind of hard to find those good local Canadian educators, because really there aren't really many, and if there are, they're not doing it at the scale that the US is. So I think that's just what happens, is that people just do a quick Google search, they follow that, you know, the biggest trending influencer on Instagram, and that's who they end up finding, and then they kind of get caught in that marketing funnel. And it's unfortunate that, you know, that they don't find the good Canadian content, but I mean, what are you gonna do?
It's 10 pages down on a Google search. You might find something Canadian, and it's hard to work your way through all those pages and all those posts and all those. Our American cousins are, I think, a bit more aggressive than we are in Canada about how we do things on the business side, and real estate is no different. They go at it harder than we do, and so that's who shows up.
Yeah. I got a young couple that I'm coaching, and when I met them, they told me a story about how they had some savings, and it was pretty much all of their savings, and they invested it into their education. They made the right decision. Hey, I'm going to invest money into my education. I'm going to treat this like a business. I'm going to get some coaching, and they jumped onto a program that was out of the US, and it was after a couple months they realized that none of it was applicable whatsoever to what they were doing here. Yeah. And it crushed me when they told me that. It was like, you know, they're young, they're like early 20s, and this is like they made that huge commitment just to find out that none of it worked. Yeah. And they were absolutely crushed by it. But I mean, thankfully we're able to, you know, get them started now. They're going down a different path, and they're doing really well. But yeah, I hear that stuff way too often. People come out to me like, hey, how do you do these strategies? What's this? You know, we just saw one recently. I think it was last week or the week before. Someone asked about 5 different strategies on Facebook that were not applicable to the US whatsoever, or to the Canada whatsoever.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's today, right?
Does come up a lot, and it's always kind of a sinking feeling about what you say to folks. You know, you end up having to say, okay, well, you know what you really need is Canadian education. They've just spent 20 or 30 or 40 grand on US inapplicable education. And you're saying, yeah, you know, what you need is some Canadian. And yeah, you got to spend a bit more money. Luckily, they don't have to spend near as much to get decent education in Canada. Just want to say, Sean, I see that you sent your Donna off to Mexico. Looks like all the Donnas are in Mexico. That's, well, good for them, I guess. Here we are.
And Arvin says, we definitely need to pump more of the Canadian content, because most that are readily available seems to be American. Yeah,
that is definitely the thing, as you just said, Wayne. All right, you guys out there. So for anybody who wanted to ask questions about American strategies, if you've heard American strategies described in a certain way. I mean, what do they do about foreclosures? What about tax liens? What about buying subject to? What about novations? What about executory contracts? What about deeds of bond? What?
Oh my!
Contracts for deed. I mean, there's a lot going on down there. And we just need to say, I think we need to say that the U.S., like Canada, regulates their real estate at the state level, and in Canada we regulate it mostly at the provincial level. So in Canada, the rules around real estate are similar in all of the provinces, but they are definitely not the same. When I say all the provinces, I always have to leave out La Belle Province because they have a totally different legal system down there, and I don't dip my toe in the civil law waters because I don't really know anything about that. But overall, I mean, for the 9 other provinces and territories, the rules around real estate are similar but not the same. So you have to always have some local expertise. And it's the same way in the States. The 50 states run things differently, kind of the same in each of them. But if you're ever down, if you do choose to invest in the States, you've got to get some great local advice. It's that story of having a good power team, whether you're in the US or in Canada, to make sure that you're being well advised and not off the track.
So Barry, what are the differences? It's real estate law, correct?
It's real estate law, yes.
And
it's property law.
Property law. So there is a federal level for property law, and then there is individual provincial. Like how does it separate? How does it differentiate?
Well, in Canada, property law is all provincial. It's not federally regulated unless you're getting into things like environmental concerns. If you're looking to subdivide a big chunk of rural land that has a fish-bearing stream going through it, you'd have to get the Federal Department of Fisheries involved, depending on what you wanted to do. But overall, for our purposes, for the things we do, it's provincially regulated. And I believe in the States, it is to a large extent state regulated. You don't have to worry about the US federal government or the Canadian federal government.
So separating between states and provinces, what are the types of things that would allow for some strategies to work and other strategies not to work?
So I'll speak on the Canadian side because I only have a general knowledge of US strategies and how they work. But on the Canadian side of things, for instance, in wholesaling, wholesaling has different rules in different provinces. So in British Columbia, they have very specific rules around wholesaling. And that came out of the enormous rise in property values in British Columbia, where someone would get a property under contract with mom and pop who lived in Kitsilano in their house for 40 years, and they'd paid, $35,000 for it 40 years ago. And somebody buys it from them for $800,000, flips it to somebody else for $850,000, who flips it for $950,000, who flips it for $1.2 million. And as it keeps getting flipped, strange people come and pound signs, for sale signs, in their home on the lawn before they've moved. So as those kinds of stories came to light, BC decided to regulate wholesaling on the disclosure side of things, on the can you say that property cannot be wholesaled? Can you put that in a contract and enforce it? They got a whole new set of rules around wholesaling in British Columbia.
Okay.
And so that is right at one end of the spectrum. And at the other end of the regulatory spectrum is Alberta, where Section 154 of our Alberta Land Titles Act says any real estate purchase contract or agreement for sale may be assigned. And It's like a 2-line section in the Alberta Land Titles Act. So any real estate purchase contract or agreement for sale can be assigned. And you can write into your contract, this contract may not be assigned without the consent of the seller. Unenforceable. The Land Titles Act says it can be assigned, and so it can. It's just like the rules around rent and security deposits. You are not allowed to take more than 1 month's rent as a security deposit, an amount equal to 1 month's rent as a security deposit. If it's a bad tenant who's got a bad history and you're looking to take a chance on him, you go, you know what? I need 3 months security deposit from you. He goes, yeah, I've been bad. I'll be good. I actually can pay 3 months. So here you go. He gives you 3 months. And if he trashes the place, guess what? In a battle, you're only going to be able to access 1 month of that, because the Residential Tenancies Act says 1 month. It's 1 month. So going back to wholesaling, in Alberta, wholesaling / assignments is totally unregulated, except that you can do it. I mean, the only regulation we have says you can assign whatever you want, as opposed to BC, which is rule ridden up the yin yang. So,
gotcha.
So, and each province has a slightly different version of that. It's basically unregulated in most provinces. They might have some documentation you like, but there's no rules around. There's no rules like there are in Alberta on the one end of the spectrum, or that there are in BC on the other end of the spectrum.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense.
So, yeah.
I guess I was just curious as to why, like, let's use agreements for sale, for example, why some people in the East Coast are having such trouble using those strategies. But I guess it depends on the province and.
Well, it depends on the province, and it depends on how prevalent agreements for sale were in any particular province. And were they ever really used very much? And agreements for sale have been more popular in the West. Very popular and well-known in Saskatchewan, pretty well-known in Alberta and BC. I've never been able to pry a comment out of our Manitoban friends on what's going on with AFS in Manitoba. Used to be used in Ontario, still known on the commercial side there, but not very much on the residential side. And I'm going to be investigating for our upcoming event what's going on in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. I'll probably get Matt Ledger to help me out on the New Brunswick side, and Doug Robertson on the Nova Scotia side. Maybe George in Yarmouth can help. George might be my AFS guy in Nova Scotia.
I've got a couple people interested in Newfoundland as well. They've been asking lots of questions lately.
Okay.
Come on, bring AFS to us. I'm like, well, at the same time, you also need a handful of lawyers who understand it as well. It's one thing for it to be understood, but then you need to have lawyers for each side of each, the parties, to be able to facilitate as well, right?
Yeah, no, that's totally true. A lawyer who doesn't understand a strategy doesn't get himself in very much trouble saying, I don't think I like the look of that. I'm advising you against it. You don't get much trouble being negative as a lawyer, but you can get in trouble being positive, saying, yeah, that looks great, not knowing anything about it. It turns out to be who knows what. Not us, of course, but some other circumstance.
Right.
So
I know your story fairly well about, like, back in the 2000s, late 2000s, when Ron LeGrand was on the stage and you were helping out, and you were the one that was like the lawyer in the background with the briefcase. She's like, actually. And I remember that's kind of when the whole agreement for sale courses and all the other creative courses, were kind of developed. What was it that Ron was teaching that didn't apply here?
Well, there's a few things that he was teaching. He was teaching the subject to strategy. So we can talk about that if you want. That's one that comes up a lot. People call me and go, I took my American course. They talk about buying properties subject to, can we do that in Canada? So let's talk about what our U.S. cousins refer to as the subject to strategy. So subject to really means, it has a couple of different meanings here. So the first one is where a buyer wants to purchase a property from a seller where there's an existing mortgage in place. And in the US, if he buys that property subject to, he's giving the seller a certain amount of cash and taking title to the property. So that's different from an agreement for sale, because under the AFS, the seller retains title. But in a subject to transaction, the buyer takes title to the property, gives the seller some cash, and he continues to make the mortgage payments on the property. So when U.S. guys explain the subject to strategy, they always say you get to take over the title, but you don't take over the mortgage. You have to make the mortgage payment, but you don't take it over. So to a large degree, for that first part, that first kind of subject to strategy, that is what in Canada we would call a mortgage assumption. A mortgage assumption. And a lot of the reading I do, people say, now remember, the bank doesn't know that you bought the property. If there's a due on sale clause in that existing mortgage, then you run the risk that the bank will discover that the property's been sold, and if the new owner has not applied to be approved, then the bank could pull that. So they do a lot of the U.S. stuff I read holds that up as an example of a risk in the subject to transaction. But so that first subject to is like a mortgage assumption here in Canada. So the other thing they say, which is a little puzzling for me, is you're not taking over the mortgage. You're not taking over. The title's changing into your name, but you're not taking over the mortgage. And I think all of that means is that the name on the mortgage continues to be the seller's name. You're not changing your name. Otherwise, you'd be going to the bank saying, hey, I bought this property subject to, and I want to change the name here.
Mm-hmm.
They go, what? Did you get approved? Get in here. Sit down. Call the sheriff. So that first type of subject to is essentially a mortgage assumption where title changes into the seller's name. The name on the mortgage stays, title changes into the buyer's name. The name on the mortgage stays in the seller's name. The buyer gives the seller some cash, and he pays the seller. The buyer pays the mortgage payment.
Sounds very risky.
Well, yeah. Although it has similarities to our agreement for sale strategy. If anybody who understands how that particular strategy works.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about another one.
Sure.
There are another type of subject to loan is what they call the seller carryback. Seller carryback subject to. And that is really a version of seller financing. So this is a situation where the buyer is actually going to buy the property, and he is lining up a new mortgage. He's lining up a new mortgage, but his new lender won't give him enough money between the cash he's got in his pocket, the loan that the lender will give him, that isn't enough to pay the seller. So the seller carryback subject to is a situation where the first mortgage lender agrees that they're okay with the seller providing a second mortgage. So it's a purchase with a first mortgage and a VTB, or a vendor take back mortgages.
Okay.
As we say that. So that is, that's also something. If the first subject to is really a mortgage assumption, well, we have those in Canada.
Yeah.
If the second one is, a vendor seller carryback subject to, that's a mortgage with a VTB. That's a purchase with a VTB. So we have those as well.
Yeah.
And then the third one is the wraparound. The wraparound, and that isn't very common, but you buy. The buyer puts an offer to the seller, and the seller says, "Yeah, I'll. You got to pay me a little bit of cash, and I've got a mortgage on the property, but I need to make a little more money than that. So you can take over my mortgage, but I'm charging you 7% instead of 5%." So the seller wraps around an extra layer of financing on his existing financing and makes a bit more money in doing that.
Okay.
So
these all sound very, very similar to strategies that we're doing in Canada, just different terminology.
yes, the first two especially are quite similar. Yeah, the cash to loan subject to is a mortgage assumption, and the seller carryback is a sale with a VTB. So that is heartening. I think in that at least there's some application of the U.S. strategies here in Canada. Just give me a second, grab my water here.
Yep, not a problem. I even with the wraparound, that's very similar to strategies that I've used, where with our seller financing schedule, I will add on a bit of a interest rate spread to collect a little bit extra for myself.
Yeah.
It is kind of the same. I mean, I don't really see much of a difference. I bet you the difference is probably in the details in the contracts, right? In the agreements.
Yeah. I think I think that the theory of the three subject to categories that we talked about are similar enough to what we do in Canada that the differences are in the documentation and in the local, how the local rules work for transferring property back and forth, what the local banking rules are. But at the theoretical strategic level, the strategies, we do have those strategies in Canada. So we got some questions here.
Yeah.
I'll pick you up.
Someone had asked, in Canada, if the title is transferred, the due on sale clause will be triggered?
Yes, any kind of sale triggers a due on sale clause.
Does it always automatically though?
Well, no, it doesn't. So let's use an example, Wayne. You have a property, and you have let's say it's a $400,000 property, and you've got a $350,000 mortgage. And I say, Wayne, I'd like to buy that property, and I'm going to assume the mortgage. And I've got $50,000 to make up the balance of the $400,000 that you want. So why don't I buy it and I'll assume the mortgage? So triggering the due on sale clause. Most mortgages have a due on sale clause. You can probably say that 99% of certainly all the mortgages I see have a due on sale clause. So that means if you sell the property, the bank can call the loan. They can call the loan. They can. They by virtue of that due on sale clause, they can call the loan. Say, hey, you sold the property. You didn't talk to us about it, and you didn't get rid of your old mortgage, so we're calling the loan. Calling the loan. So what would happen if you and I just did this between ourselves?
Just signed a deed over to you or title?
Transfer land over to me. I give you $50,000. Title will go into my name. I set up to make the mortgage payments. Maybe I give it to you and you make them. Who knows? The due on sale clause will not be triggered unless the bank comes along and says, so we're just checking up on our properties. Wayne, do you still own that property? Oh my God, you've caught me. No, I sold it to Barry. So
I don't sound that high pitched, do I?
No, you don't. Ever. Just practicing for my garage band later. I got to sing some high harmony. So
You singing some Rush? Geddy Lee?
yeah, I love Geddy. He's got such a penetrating voice, man. So your question was, is the due on sale clause always triggered? Something has to, the bank is the one that triggers the clause. So something has to make the bank do that. Right. So they discover that a property has been sold without their knowledge and they don't like that. They would trigger the due on sale clause. They discover that a property has been sold without their knowledge, but they also discover that it was sold 18 months ago and the payments have been made like clockwork. Mm-hmm. And they go, well, we could trigger it, but why don't we shake our finger at them and tell them they've got to do some paperwork and just carry on? So it's not always triggered. It's situational.
And I mean, it is situational is a really good way to put it, because a lender, they did just lose their collateral, did they not? That the whole reason why they registered that mortgage on that property was to protect themselves in the event that they ever needed to take the property back and, mitigate their losses. But if they lost that privilege or that ability to, I guess they'd have to weigh the pros and cons of, do we go after them and go through this lengthy process of legal and foreclosure, or do we just kind of let them keep making the payments until it becomes a problem?
Well, an interesting thing about that comment is if you and I did that deal and I took over the title came into my name, mm-hmm. Your mortgage is still on the property. The Alberta Land Titles Act says that if you ever take over a property with existing financing, mm-hmm. you become responsible for that mortgage. So they don't lose their collateral. Their mortgage remains registered against the property, and it is effective against whoever happens to have the title in their name. Would have been effective against you if you didn't make payments. It's effective against me if I'm not making payments, or if they want to enforce the due on sale clause. So they don't lose their protection.
So it almost triggers like an automatic mortgage assumption.
Well, that's what you and I are doing. We're doing a mortgage assumption between us without permission of the bank.
Huh.
Yeah.
I was not aware of that.
Yeah. Well, and I think there's a few more of those going on than we think, because when a title transfers, the bank doesn't get notice of the title transfer. Mm-hmm. So the only way they know about it is if they do an audit. Banks do audits of their properties every once in a while. A property's coming up for the mortgage is coming up for renewal, and maybe there's been a few missed payments. Maybe interest rates have risen. Maybe they're edgy about a certain part of the country. And so internal policy says, okay, when these come up for renewal, okay, let's dig in there. Let's get a title. Let's go send an appraiser out. Let's see what we think about our property. So that is how banks would become aware that a title had been changed without previously them knowing about it.
Right.
Or if payments are not made, of course, that causes these things to happen. So I think for people who know their way around the system and how it operates, that there might be more of this going on than we know about. Mm-hmm. I don't see really any of that, because people understand that lenders really want there to be an application to assume a mortgage, and they're not comfortable saying, well, let's just keep it quiet. And I agree. Why would we do that?
Yeah. I'm surprised educators teach this. You know what I mean? Or option number one of the whole title in the US, title transfer, just hush, hush, don't say it to anyone. Don't worry, they never pull title. And I mean, not to throw anyone under the bus because this person's not here, but this is what someone was saying that someone was teaching. It was teaching that the bank may call the loan due, but they won't as long as the payment's being made. And mystery user asked, what's your experience been in Canada? Have you heard about these types of things happening?
Well, that is, I mean, I think what Ron was saying, and I tend to agree, is on on a practical basis,
Mhm.
that is what may happen. And you and I alluded to this, 5 or 10 minutes ago.
Yeah.
Our example, I buy your house. Bank doesn't know about it. The payments are all made faithfully. And if the bank then discovers, and they've found, 18 months of not missed a payment, everything great, since I bought from you, they, as our Mr. User says, won't, as long as that
Mhm.
payment's being made. So I do believe that lenders and banks are much more amenable to letting a situation ride if they're being paid and there has been no trouble with their loan.
Mhm.
So it's practical versus legal.
Someone else was asking recently about wholesaling, the differences between wholesaling in the U.S. and the differences in Canada. I think you talked about it a little bit. You mentioned a few of those things when you were listing them off earlier. One of the big things, obviously, tax liens.
Well, tax liens are a particular U.S. strategy. They're a particular U.S. strategy. I don't think they connect too much to wholesaling, but just as a little segue there, I think for our upcoming event on March 18th, I'm going to delve into the U.S. wholesaling strategy a little bit more to see if I can add something there, because I do actually get questions about people who want to do wholesaling in the States. It's a simple strategy that's easy to understand, and they can grasp how they might go down to the States and do that. So I'm going to just check into that a wee bit more. But on the tax lien side of things, now I have not investigated this for the rest of Canada because to my knowledge, it just does not work the way it works in the States. So this is one where it doesn't work. So tax liens, what are those? In the US, if a property owner does not pay their taxes, the city or the county, the municipality, whoever issues the tax notices, issues something called a tax lien certificate. And that tax lien certificate states how much is owed and what kind of interest is being accumulated on this debt. How much interest is the homeowner building up that they owe the state or the municipality because they haven't paid their taxes. And then on a regular basis, the municipalities take their tote box full of tax lien certificates and they give them to an auctioneer. And that can be done in person or online. And folks who like to deal in tax lien certificates bid on those tax lien certificates. And so you can bid on them, and if it's one that's of great interest to investors, let's say it's somebody owes $10,000 worth of taxes and the county's charging them 8% worth of interest. So if it looks like it's a good bet from how the tax lien guys analyze, and I don't know all of the analysis that they go through, then they would bid, say $7,000. Somebody else thinks it's a really good deal, they'd bid $7,500. Somebody else says, I don't know anything about this, but if those two guys think it's great, I'm bidding $8,000. So they run through calculations based on the price or the amount of the tax lien and the interest rate that's payable, and they work those two things to figure out what kind of bids they're on. So it's a competitive auction, and if you win the auction, you now own the tax lien.
Okay.
And so what that means is that you're now standing in the shoes of the municipality, and if the lien was for $10,000 at 6% and it's been outstanding for 2.5 years, then you can do that calculation, and that's what it's worth.
Okay.
And if the homeowner does not pay the tax lien by its due date, because you now own the tax lien, you can essentially foreclose on that homeowner, and take over the property.
Mm.
So the one thing I think that's the same is in the materials I've read in Canada and the US is that for most homeowners, if they have a $500,000 property that's got a $2,000 tax bill that hasn't been paid, they don't not pay the tax bill and let you take over their $500,000 property. They pay up the taxes. So I know that's certainly the situation in Edmonton. The city publishes a list here. I think in most municipalities in Canada, taxes are due, they're not paid. Sooner or later, the city publishes a list of who owes what, and then a time by which it has to be paid. And then you can try and purchase those properties for the price of the taxes.
Hmm.
And almost always the homeowner will pay that up. In fact, there's quite a business on the lending side where lenders search those records, and they search out those folks who haven't been able to pay their taxes and who might lose their property, and they lend them money at exorbitant rates so that they can get the municipality to lay off on taking their house away from them.
Mm.
Some other one who buys it to take it away. So tax liens, it's a particular business in the US. They have very sophisticated auctions, virtual and in person to do it. But I think the principle applies in Canada and the US that most of those liens end up getting paid off.
Gotcha.
So that's tax liens, kind of similar, but not quite. All right. Well, there's a long question there.
Yeah. I'll pull that up here.
All right.
It's cutting half your face off. What about obtaining loans based on a percentage of ARV that actually end up being 100% or more of the purchase price? Let's say you purchase an undervalued property from a wholesaler, needs a bunch of renos. For example, if ARV price is $300,000 and you obtain a loan of 80% of ARV, but the purchase price was $210,000, then you'd cover the purchase price plus you'd have $300,000 for closing and or renos.
Okay, Arik. So good thinking.
Mm-hmm.
This is probably a lender question.
Mm-hmm.
Because lenders will lend on the basis of the contract price or the appraised value, whichever is the lesser.
Yeah.
Contract price or appraised value, whichever is the lesser. Now, will they go on the appraised ARV? That would work if they would do that.
Yeah.
But they likely are looking at the property and going, okay, you're paying $210, but our appraiser says it's worth $190, so we'll give you a mortgage based on $190.
Mm-hmm.
Now some lenders do something similar to that, don't they? They do the purchase plus improvements loan.
Yeah.
So that is not quite the same, but it's in the ballpark. What about Calvert? Wayne, if you come to Calvert with some situation like this, what would Calvert say to you for that one?
That's a good question. I don't know if they'll loan up to the appraised value. I know that private lenders are much more flexible,
Mm-hmm.
and especially in regards to, or if they know that it's going to be the type of deal where you're going to be doing improvements. I don't know if Calvert specifically does it, but I know that many private lenders will give you a loan based off of the appraised value, or perhaps maybe they'll give you additional funds for your renovations if they know the value of the property is worth significantly more than what you're buying it for.
Yeah.
But it's a case by case from my understanding.
It is a case by case, and one thing that is, I think, a big factor in this is your experience in doing this. So, Arik, if you're doing now your 10th fix and flip, where you've followed this exact same strategy, where you can show your lender all the numbers from top to bottom and a spreadsheet of exactly for each one of those 10 properties, what you paid, what you put in, what your estimates were as you went through them, and how it turned out, and have a track record of knowing what the heck you're doing, then you'll get a lot more traction with a lender who you're asking to step out of the normal lending rules. I mean, they want to. Every lender wants to lend to someone who's going to be successful, and the ones that have some ability to be flexible can be convinced if you've got the proof. So that's a good thing to work on, and it's a good reason not to jump around in strategies until you get good at one.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of leverage to be made from getting good at a strategy, and then continuing to improve it, and not only with lenders but with joint venturers.
Mm-hmm.
Man, it's so much easier saying, well, here's my portfolio, here's my strategy, here's how it works, here's the portfolio, here's the spreadsheets attached to all of those, and here's why I'm confident that for project number 11, we're not only going to increase our 20% net return, we think we're going to get it up to about 22% on this one, and here's why. So that's a much easier call for a lender, and it's getting over those first few damn deals as you improve your chops and get better at what you do.
100%.
More questions?
Yeah, George has a question. Good question. Is lease options the US version applicable here in Canada, where we can allocate monthly credits to tenant buyer towards their down payments, which will apply when they buy the property?
Well, there's a couple of things in there, George. This is a circumstance where the documentation is quite different. Mm-hmm. So I've looked at U.S. option agreements, and one thing they use some different terms based on what the particular state has for how they run options. So the wording is substantially different. So if we're just saying, is the U.S. form of lease option, if I have a U.S. form of lease option, can I use it in Canada? Not without modification. You can't, for sure. Second thing is they often seem to combine their option and lease, and we don't really like to do that here. We want the lease and the option to stand on their own. And the third thing is, George, if you're saying that you're going to allocate a monthly credit to the tenant buyer toward their ultimate cash down payment they're putting in, that's also a tough go. And the reason is that when the tenant buyer goes to get a mortgage, the lender wants to see, especially CMHC if they're involved, the lender wants to see that the tenant buyer has been paying market rent. Yeah. So if market rent is $1,500 a month, and your option agreement says, we are going to give you a credit of $400 per month toward your down payment each month you're in the property, then what lenders look at that and say is, they're not paying market rent of $1,500, they're only paying $1,100. So you can do it in your agreement, but the lender may not give that tenant buyer credit for it at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So I got to be careful about that one for sure.
It doesn't take much to find a local investor focused real estate lawyer who can kind of help you out with this stuff. Because I think the two most important things you want as an investor when you're looking at a lease option contract is to ensure, one, that you're protected. So you got to be very careful with the terminology, like Barry was saying, even just saying down payment or those types of things. The wrong terminology can kind of put you in hot water if things ever go sideways. And second, you want to make sure that all of the terms are you want to make sure that they're all done properly and all the rules are being followed so that your tenant buyer can actually qualify for a mortgage. Something as simple as what he just said there can affect their ability to qualify. And if you're hindering their ability to qualify for a CMHC mortgage, you're kind of setting them up for failure, right?
Yes.
So just always make sure you're finding good local content or good contracts.
I see Sean says big factor is exit plan, and that is so true. That is so true. You guys probably know Sean's an ace mortgage broker and investor himself, got lots of experience. As an investor and as a mortgage broker that helps investors. So if you're doing creative investing, it's a little tough to go to your local branch of CIBC and get the kind of lending advice that a guy like Sean can give you. So remember that when you're looking for financing. Eric says,
there's one from Dawn as well. I'm not 100% sure on this one. Are you familiar with it?
I don't know what an EMD is. What's an EMD, Don?
Google says earnest money deposit.
Earnest money deposit.
I
don't know how that fits into anything. So I have to say I don't know about that.
I'm not familiar with that. Eric followed up with, what about using crowdfunding or peer-to-peer lending platforms to fund real estate projects? I'm assuming those would be more common in US. Have any of you had any experience with this? Well, there's not crowdfunding. Now I'm at a loss of words. What's the term? I'll let you handle this one, Barry.
I got it. I'm in the end zone. So Eric, crowdfunding or peer-to-peer lending, I haven't been involved in any of those. They might be more common in the US, but the first thing that comes to mind for me is if you're going to set up any kind of crowdfund or peer-to-peer lending platform, you're going to have to be careful about running afoul of the Securities Commission.
Mm-hmm.
That's really probably the biggest issue there. If you're raising money through a crowdfund or a peer-to-peer, you're raising public funds for investment purposes, and I'm pretty sure the Securities Acts of the various provinces. And remember, there's one U.S.-Canadian difference. We have a Securities Act or similar legislation in all of the 10 provinces and the territories, whereas the U.S. has federal securities legislation. So we're provincial, they're federal. But I think you'd run afoul of Securities Act stuff in raising money through crowdfunding or peer-to-peer lending.
Thank you, Walter. That's what I was trying to come up with, was a syndicated investors pooling money together through a syndication was what I was thinking of. I'm not an expert in it, but it's a popular strategy these days. A lot of people are putting up a lot of webinars on that. There's a few groups that are buying a lot of properties in the US through this strategy.
Well, I mean, a syndicated mortgage is really just a bunch of people who want to get together and pool their money into a mortgage. And if there's too many of them, they have to have a vehicle that would be the lender. There are companies that do that as a business, and some of them have been quite big. Some of them have been big and gone bad. What was that one in Toronto? Fortress. Fortress took in hundreds of millions of dollars from many investors and said that they were lending it out on secure mortgages, and turned out not to be. But a syndicated mortgage can be a good way for smaller investors to get together and pool their money to buy bigger projects. So that's something where you need to get some specialized advice. So
yeah,
going to finish with there's a couple of other U.S. terms that I've come across. Novation. Novation is a situation where two people are in a contract and a third party comes in and replaces one of the existing two parties, and now it's a new contract or a novation. The other one is something called an executory contract. Executory contracts are those kinds of contracts where the obligation to do something is off in the future. And my research says that these can be agreements for sale, which we understand, things called land contracts, contracts for deeds, or bonds for deeds. And in a typical situation, the buyer and seller enter into an agreement. And under the executory contract, the buyer has the right but not the obligation to complete the purchase. So there's got to be more to it than that. I don't know of too many circumstances in Canada where a seller would want to get himself into a contract with a buyer where the buyer had no obligation to complete. I mean, that sounds like an option to me. And at that, Wiener.
Yes, sir.
Not Wiener.
Not since grade school.
I guess. Folks, thanks for showing up and listening to our discussion on some of the American strategies and how it fits into Canada. This hour zoomed along like crazy. I wasn't quite sure we'd be able to, but as always, there's lots to talk about. So thanks everyone for participating. Please do mark in your calendar March 18th in Calgary for wholesaling. Full day event. We feed you like crazy. Great guys, got great case studies, great documentation, great panels. It's a great way to learn about wholesaling. March 18th, Calgary. Wayne, any closing words?
I think we covered it. There's lots of great stuff we talked about today. Lots of stuff we didn't even get a chance to get to.
I know. Always another one.
I highly recommend coming out on March 18th. I'll tell you what. Like, I think it's let's stop wasting our time looking at all this American stuff and start looking at some good Canadian content. We just talked about it, did we not? On how you need some good Canadian education, and here it is. And I'll just say, I had a discussion with some people recently, and they were saying, "Where can I find a good wholesaling course in person?" And I'm like, I don't think I've seen one in 10 years. I mean, with the exception of like the Rapid Cash program, having that live, there hasn't been any really good wholesaling workshops. So I'm excited for it. I'm super stoked. And everybody else I know who's coming is excited too. So hopefully see you guys.
We've expanded it a lot from what we do in Rapid Cash, because that's what we do in the all-day events. Mm-hmm. All right, folks. Well, thanks for showing up. We'll sign off now, and we'll talk to you next week. Good night, everybody.
Bye, guys.